Hi, this is Christina Dubois-Nugent coming to you with how to create a risk graph using the option chain. So hopefully you've already listened to the option chain recording, so you get a sense of how the option chain is set up. If I'm going to go in and use again Disney as my example, dated back on the 17th of February 2015, and I'm doing a short-term trade, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily the best strategy for this particular example that we're looking at. It's more about creating a risk graph. Calls are on the left-hand side, puts are over on the right-hand side. I'm going to create a bull call spread, a call spread, and I'm going to go ahead and create one using 103 calls. I'm going to buy that. So if I'm going to buy that, I'm going to buy one of those, and then I'm going to sell the 105s, and I'm going to put a -1 when I'm selling. When you're buying something, you put in a plus value. If you're selling it, you can put in a negative value. If you want to do it times 10, times 5, just put in the right quantity amount in there that you want in order to be the position sizes you like. Because I don't know yet how I'm going to position size it, I'm just going to go and do a 1 by 1. And then you're going to hit the risk graph. Now, the different risk graphs to look at. A regular risk graph is for those who have slower internet, or if you're in location that internet is just not as speedy as normal and you don't need to see all the bells and whistles, and you turn on regular risk graph. If you want to look at some of the tools that I use and where I normally live in is risk graph 2. And then you also have risk channel, where it actually provides you a channel based on where the stock activity has been for the last, I believe, 40 days. It projects out and it shows you a channel. So that's worth looking at as well. But I'm going to start with risk graph 2 as the first recording discussion. And what we're going to do in this part 1 of the recording is really deal with the numeric information. So what I want to deal with is how do we divide it out? How does the risk graph divide out as far as information, and then how to take the pieces. Part 1 being the top portion, looking at the numeric information and what does that provide to us. Part 2 is the actual risk graph. Now I have it zoomed out a little bit, so I can definitely zoom in and show it a little closer in so you can see the entire risk graph, if you will, with the stock chart also in the picture. So that's easy enough to take a look at as well. And then underneath is the control. Well, then you have the implied volatility chart. Also, we'll talk about that in another recording. And then you have, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, you are looking at your trade plan, critical part of your decision making when it comes to entering a trade. Why did you get into the trade? What's your exit if you're wrong? What's your target of stock movement? How many contracts? What's the total dollar amounts? How much are you willing to lose? How much are we focused in making? If there's a time stop, if there's a volatility stop, and there's some other stops that I don't use quite as much. And then you have the actual risk graph settings, which again I will do in another recording. And then at the very bottom is some of the statistical information related to past history information. It's going to give me a probabilities factor or table that I really just use for at the money credit spreads or condors, and occasionally write at the money butterfly. So I'm going to speak to that possibly in another recording. So let's right now talk about the top portion. What you're looking at is important information to understand where to find everything. Obviously the stock information, it tells you here the dividend information. Shortly I'm going to actually ask for earnings information to actually be located here, so look for that. I hope to see that soon. And then you have what is the mid price based on getting filled at the center entry price. So you have bid ask, the true bid ask, and then the value that lies in between that. So when you take a look, let me see if I can get the calculator up here real quick. What you're looking at is, if you're looking at your buy leg, which we bought the 103s and we sold the 105s. So obviously what we're looking at is on the buy leg, if I bought this for $1 So let me go ahead and so if I bought this for $1.74, that's the mid price of $1.78. So if we put $1.78, which is worst case scenario, minus best case scenario, $1.69, that gives me 9 cents. And if I divide that in half, that is basically 5 cents rounded up. So if I take $1.69 and I add 5 cents, there's your midpoint. So that's where we're getting our entry mid-price calculation. Now, how do we get to an entry cost of $1.09? Well, if I'm buying this for $1.74 and I'm selling the 105 for 65 cents, you do minus 65 cents. I'm now looking at $1.09. That's my cost per contract. Now, how much stock does one contract control? 100 shares of stock. So you have to take that times 100, and that gives me my 109 debit. So that's what I'm looking at, is my 109 debit. Now, how much money can I make? Well, the most I can make, it says, is $91. Well, how do we come up with that? Well, it has to do with the profit potential between 103 to 105. If I can buy it at 103 and I'm forced to sell it at 105 at expiration, there's $2 of value there. But that $2 of value is actually costing me $1.09 to get into it, right? So if I have $2 or $200 of value and it's costing me $109 to get into the trade, that's the most that I can make in the trade. And when I take that reward potential and I divide that by my debit, I have the potential to make 83.49 rounded up profit to risk. That's what you're seeing, which is not a good normal bear call scenario. But this is a 10-day trade, different parameters. We're normally looking for about a 45-day trade. So different parameters, again, just wanting you to understand the math of it. Now, how do I get to my break even? And my break even is always at expiration. That isn't as relevant to me because I never take most trades outside of credit spreads to expiration, credit spreads and condors. So on a debit spread such as this, I'm going to exit ahead of time. So not as important, but how do we calculate it? Well, if I got 109 in the trade, so 109 in the trade, which is really, divided by 100, $1.09, you have to add that to your workhorse, your expensive leg, to determine what is my break even at expiration. So if I add that 103 to the 109 to 103, there you have your break even at expiration. So again, something else to understand in your calculations. Now, how many days to expiration? Well, we're looking at 10 days to expiration. So you can see I have 10 days to expiration. It tells me OI open interest. How many contracts currently exist? Again, on a 10-day trade, I wish I could have 500, but I am good with anything over 100. Volume tells me how much activity happened that trading day. I'm looking at the end of the trading day. This is looking in back test mode. If you are in current day, you may have no volume. I don't really care as much about volume. I care about open interest. Implied volatility tells you how much impact would 1% move in implied volatility make on this position. And you can see the buy leg has more impact than the sell leg. Implied volatility is another conversation. Stay tuned for that particular recording. And then basically what you're looking at is you're buying the 103 calls and you're selling the 105 calls, and that gives you your net debit. That is a overall summary of the top of the screen. One other thing, well, if I go to save this trade in a particular folder that you already have to have created, you're going to hit the save button. Once you hit save, then you have some additional tools on the left-hand side. Not going to cover them all, but the most important ones for me is if I want to go in and make another version of this. Perhaps I would like to look at the 104s and 106s, or if I want to change the quantity of legs, you can always go in and clone here. If you don't want to save the original, you can just go ahead and edit. If you want to go and change from the risk graph 2 view to a simpler risk graph because your internet's acting up, or if you want to see how it channels into it, this is where you can go as well. And then if you want to do an overlay and compare two different stocks, two different trades at the same time, select the trade that you want to compare it to, and then hit the overlay button. You do have to adjust and find that second trade, or when you hit overlay, you're just basically looking at the same trade twice. So that's our discussion on part 1 of the risk graphs view.